Hello. As Tess and I sit down to record today, there's a lot going on in the world, specifically in our country, that we saw reflected in today's film and will likely come up in our discussion. It wasn't deliberate on our part, it's just the way it worked out time wise. But today's discussion is, as you will hear, apropos to the moment in which we find ourselves. It's sad and scary, full of chaos, and both wariness about the future and a deep weariness. And yet, this particular film reminds us that very often the boat comes. And the sound of children's voices playing and laughing is one of the most beautiful things you will ever hear.
Hello and welcome to Woman Inherits the Earth, a mother-daughter podcast about the representation of women in movies and television. I am Tessa Dare, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Karanzan Chronicles, and Beth's daughter.
And I am Beth Von Baron, Tessa's mother, and also a writer. In the podcast today, we discuss Children of Men, a movie directed by Alfonso Cuarón and adapted from the novel by one of my favorite writers, P.D. James.
Before we get into our summary and discussion, I want to talk very briefly about why we've had such a long break in recording, and I also want to warn you that this might be one of our more interrupted audios so far. We were always going to take a little bit of a break for the holidays. Beth came up to visit me for Christmas, and we had a very packed week while she was here. We did a lot of fun stuff around Seattle. Highly recommend the Underground Donut Tour if you have it in your city. It was too much sugar, but it was a lot of fun. But on top of that, before Christmas, I got a terrible cold that destroyed my voice for 2 or 3 weeks. The actual contagious part of the illness was only about 5 or 6 days, but I had an awful cough and a scratchy throat for weeks following. And then a week before Christmas, my oven broke. The house that I live in is very old, and my partner and I decided to replace the gas stove with an all-electric stove, and thus began a 2-month-long increasing nightmare of trying to get our kitchen back to working order. And that is a process that has been going on for 2 weeks, during which time we were supposed to record but couldn't because it was pretty loud. The construction is still happening, but at this point I'm not sure when it will be done, so I thought that delaying yet another week would be silly because who knows how long we're gonna have to delay. So there is construction happening in the background. Also, my partner, who normally very kindly vacates the room while we record, has nowhere else to go at the moment. So he's in the background. You might hear some typing. You might hear my very grumpy cat meowing. You might hear some construction noises. There's a lot going on, but we wanted to get back to recording. So here we are.
Yeah, and I'll just throw into that I had a month-long norovirus and came home from Seattle to a sick cat. So yeah, it's been a rough couple months, but we are so excited to be back at it today.
And also excited to be talking about a movie that I think is a favorite of both of us.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I read the book years and years and years ago, and when it came out as a movie, I remember going to see it and thinking, "Oh, that wasn't very good." But I was still thinking in terms of P.D. James and what an incredible writer she is or was. But then since then, years have gone by, and I watched it a couple years ago. And thought, man, that's a great movie. And then when we were talking about it a couple months ago, we said, "Oh yeah, we got to do it." So
yeah, I think this is definitely one of those movies that you have to see as kind of a separate entity from the book.
You do, yeah.
And I was just reading some background on it. It sounds like Alfonso Cuarón deliberately decided not to read the book because he was afraid it would make him second guess his storytelling decisions.
Oh yeah.
So a lot of people who worked on the movie did read the book, but the director did not. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a summary. I'm gonna read read an intro paragraph that I wrote, and then I'm basically going to flip over to the Wikipedia summary, because when I tried to summarize this movie, it's so densely packed with plot that I was unable to shorten my summary to less than 2 pages, and Wikipedia has written a shorter summary. So, all right. Children of Men, the movie we are discussing today, opens with a kind of voiceover montage detailing humanity's sudden species-wide infertility and the series of worldwide crises that followed, and Britain's transformation into a totalitarian state. After the montage fades out, we cut to a cafe where a television is airing an announcement of the death of baby Diego, the world's youngest human, who was 18 at the time of his death in a pub brawl. The people in the shop stand mesmerized by the screen, some of them crying. Our protagonist, Theo, enters the shop, orders his coffee, glances briefly and apathetically at the screen, and then leaves again. Moments after he has left, as he stands a few yards away pouring liquor into his coffee, the cafe explodes. And you actually see a woman walk out missing one of her arms.
And that's how the movie starts. That's what you open up with.
It sets the tone in a pretty abrupt way. So Theo Farron is a former activist turned cynical bureaucrat. After that intro and a quick intro where we are introduced to his friend Jasper, and we get some shots of Jasper's house that show his previous life as a political cartoonist and his wife Janice's previous life as a journalist, which appears to have ended when she was taken by the government and tortured. We don't really know why.
Did you get that in the movie? Because I didn't see that in the movie.
No one says it, but when Theo comes to Jasper's house, you get shots of the papers that are on the wall. Yeah, and it shows that she had previously won some kind of award for journalism, and then there's some kind of notice about how she was tortured. It might not explicitly say by the government, but that is kind of the implication.
She's catatonic. She's awake. Yeah. She eats, and her eyes follow action. You can see that, but there's she's
she doesn't engage. Yeah, she doesn't engage with the world, and it does not seem like she would be able to survive if Jasper was not taking care of her. And so he seems to spend his days taking care of her and their dog and growing marijuana
that he sells. That's how he makes his living.
Yeah, he reveals to Theo that the main place that he sells it to is one of the guards for the nearby refugee camp Bexhill, which comes up later. On his way back from Jasper's place, Theo gets kidnapped by the Fishes, and this is where we're going into the Wikipedia summary. The Fishes are a militant refugee rights group led by Theo's estranged wife, Julian Taylor. The pair separated after their son's death during the 2008 flu pandemic, and the Fishes are seen as a terrorist organization by the government. Julian offers Theo money to acquire transit papers for a young refugee woman named Key. Theo then goes to his cousin and manages to obtain joint transit papers from his cousin, who is a government minister in charge of, I think they call it the Ark of Art or something. He's in charge of essentially preserving important art pieces,
including the David,
the David,
by Michelangelo, and a huge, and actually it's Guernica by Picasso that's in his dining room, and that is the actual piece. Now the David is not, obviously, because it's in Florence, but they actually borrowed the painting for the film.
And he also says that they were only able to get 2 Goyas before the rest were destroyed, I guess, and La Pietà had been destroyed before they were able to get to it. Mm-hmm. And Theo and his cousin exchange some words about kind of the futility of the project. Like, Theo does not know for whom this art is being preserved, because no one's having babies, so what is the point of preserving the art? And I think there can be arguments back and forth. Obviously, I am a person who is in general in favor of preserving art, but to
me it's a major theme in the story.
But there is a kind of absurdity to the fact that this wealthy white guy is living in this giant apartment far above the city full of art that, again, that they're preserving it, and we don't know if there is actually a museum anywhere where anyone can see it, but what we do see is apparently only this dude and his son and the people who visit him get to see David. For whom are we preserving the art? And Theo also has a little back and forth with him about how do you keep doing this every day, and his cousin basically says, I just don't think about it.
Nigel seems to be living on this campus of some sort that is walled in. He's in a big building that is his home, and presumably other people live there too. I'm not sure. Maybe it's where the seat of government is. It's not really clear, but outside of it is just a beautiful park area, and that is walled off to the rest of the population as well. And there are
Yeah.
people having picnics and playing in their playgrounds, and it's a beautiful area in contrast, and I mean in dark contrast to the world outside the walls.
Yes.
So there's other stuff going on here that is pure Alfonso Cuarón, and it's not explained.
When we see it from Theo's perspective, and he's basically in a car being driven to his cousin's place. So he doesn't even actually get to walk through the park. It's always, we are only seeing it from the other side of the fence, basically.
He's in a luxury car, too. It's a Rolls Royce, I think. Or Bentley. It's a luxury car.
But even him with his connection to power doesn't actually get to engage. He doesn't get to be in the park. The park is just for the super wealthy. The rest of the world has kind of gone to shit, basically.
Well, I get the impression, and maybe it was just me, that he probably could be a part of this world because of his connection to Nigel, but maybe he doesn't want to.
I mean, maybe, yeah.
He was an activist.
Yeah, he was an activist. Now it kind of seems like he's living a subsistence level life with no real purpose to it. Julian ostensibly gets him to agree to this for the money. I do think it's pretty clear that he actually agrees to help her out just because he still loves her. Anyway, so he does get the papers from his cousin, but they are joint transit papers, which means that he will have to escort Key in order for the papers to work, basically. Theo then meets Luke, another one of the Fish's leaders, and Key, who is the refugee in question, and Miriam, a former midwife. And they all get together to drive towards Canterbury, where one of their safe houses is. But on the way, an armed gang ambushes them and kills Julian right in front of Theo. They manage to escape the gang and are then confronted by the police, and Luke just summarily shoots the two police officers, and then they drive away. They briefly stop to, I think they don't fully bury Julian's body, they just sort of cover it up, and Miriam does a little prayer over her body, and Theo has a brief breakdown moment where he walks away from them and sobs for a bit, and then they continue on to the safe house. At the safe house, Key basically summons Theo to come see her in this barn, and it's a very obviously symbolic scene in this barn where there are a bunch of milking cows, and she makes not exactly a joke, but she talks to him about how silly it is that we've designed these machines that apparently can only milk some of the cows' teats, so we cut off the other teats so that the cows will fit into the machine. And she's kind of commenting on how absurd it is that we don't just build a machine that can actually accommodate the whole cow.
Well, and interesting about that to me is that cows are a recurring visual theme in this. In fact, the first time we see countryside is when Jasper has picked up Theo at the train station, and they're driving through the countryside, and before they get to his house, they drive past the fields where cows have been burned to death.
And we never really know why.
And people are starving. Why are they destroying cows? Although on the other hand, are there a lot of cows growing in the UK? I mean, I didn't think that was a place that raised cows, but apparently.
Oh, it does. That's where mad cow disease originated, was the UK. I do wonder if that visual is in there in part because of that, because I think this movie came out much closer in time to when mad cow disease was a problem. We haven't heard about it as much recently, but this movie is 20 years old at this point? Just about.
Well, it was made in, and actually we did skip over that. It was made in 2006. It's an hour and 49 minutes long. It was rated R, which was unusual for the movies that we have been watching, I think, or maybe I just didn't notice before. I'm sure that some of the movies we've watched have been rated R, but this one, it was real obvious.
Yeah, so Key summons Theo to see her in the barn and then reveals that she is pregnant, and making her the only pregnant woman in the world.
She reveals it to him by removing her clothes, and he's astounded. Don't. He thinks she's trying to offer herself to him until she gets, because the first thing you see are her breasts, but then she pulls the dress down even more and you see that she is pregnant.
Yeah, I think initially he's confused why she's doing it, and obviously he has no sexual interest in her, and maybe he thinks that she thinks that this is like, what she's expected to do or whatever.
That says a lot about Theo right there. I just want to interject this, that he is a really decent person. Anybody else might have tried to rape her or whatever, but he realizes, first of all, she's a child. She is young enough to be his child. child. And secondly, he just doesn't, he thinks she's offering herself to him in exchange or in payment, I guess,
Yeah.
for his help, and he's not doing this. At this point, his motivation has become a little unclear. Originally, it was he was doing it for Julian, not so much for the money,
Yeah.
but now Julian is dead, and it's more about self-preservation. But that changes very quickly in this, and it changes in this moment.
Yeah, part of their conversation is that he wants to leave. He no longer wants to help now that Julian is dead, which is not to say
Yeah.
that he is against helping. It's just that his motivation was Julian. Now he just wants to take his money and go back to his life until he sees that she's pregnant and he realizes that this is
Everything changes.
yeah, way bigger, way more important than he thought. I think it's intentionally meant to bring to mind the image of the Virgin Mary. Like, very obviously, they're in a barn.
Oh, yeah.
There's no other reason
yeah.
why this needed to happen in a barn.
Yeah.
And the music sounds like choir music. And it's this moment.
Yeah.
He looks like a man who is looking on the face of God. You know, it's this very odd moment.
He's he's awestruck. That is exactly what it is, and he can't take his eyes off of her. It's a turning point in the movie. Very early on, it's like 37 minutes, I think I wrote down. It was 37 minutes in, and can't take his eyes off of her, and realizes why Julian was willing to sacrifice herself, which is what she did.
I believe Key at that point also explains that Julian was going to take her to the Human Project, which is a secret scientific research group in the Azores dedicated to curing humanity's infertility. We had heard about this a little bit before. Jasper had brought it up. Jasper believed in it, and Theo basically said that even if it is real, what's the point? We're already done. So he's a little bit skeptical of this mission, but this is what Julian was intending. She was intending to bring Key to the Human Project, and specifically to a boat. They're going to meet this boat called the Tomorrow. Back in the main house at this farmhouse, the Fishes have a very brief election, and Luke is chosen as the new leader, and they have a meeting to talk about what's going to happen to Key now. And now with Luke in charge, he has decided, he says it's because of Julian's death. He thinks it is now too dangerous to try to get her to the coast and to the Human Project. Key still wants to go, but she looks to Theo to decide. And Theo is basically still processing the whole pregnancy thing, and he's just like, I think you need to get to a hospital. I think you need care.
Yeah, he's focused on her and her health and the baby's health. You need care. You need a doctor.
Yeah.
And the thing is, she's very pregnant. She's not just a little
very
pregnant.
Yeah,
she is 8 months pregnant, and for a first pregnancy, you can tell she's just about to pop. And I'm not kidding about that. She's very pregnant.
Yeah, well, and she thinks she's 8 months pregnant. I think she's probably actually 9 months pregnant.
And she definitely is, yeah.
Because as she explains to Theo at some point, she had no idea what the signs of pregnancy were, so she probably didn't know she was pregnant for a while.
She didn't know, and nobody around her knew.
Yeah,
nobody knows
exactly.
anymore. Nobody except for the midwife, which is why her presence is kind of vital here.
During this discussion, Miriam, the midwife, still wants to get Key to the Human Project.
The whole thing that's going on here is that people cannot have babies anymore. Theo, like every other person on the planet, believes that the human species has come to an end.
Yeah.
And then we meet Key, who is the key to the future in many ways. And so that's why when he sees her pregnant and can't stop staring at her, because you can just see everything that's going through his mind. Oh my God, everything I've thought for 20 years is no longer true. Everything has changed in that moment for the entire world.
During this conversation, Luke is able to convince Key not to go to the coast and to just stay with the Fishes. And I think even in this scene, he says she'll be more protected if she stays with them, and also that she'll be a very important symbol for the uprising.
And she trusts Luke. She has no reason not to trust Luke because Julian trusted Luke.
She doesn't entirely trust Luke because she does say to Theo that Julian told her to only trust Theo. But when she turns to Theo during this conversation,
good point.
He's kind of not engaging on what she's actually asking. He thinks she should just go to a hospital because he's still processing.
He's all new to this. And Julian had been with these men, working with these men for years. Yeah. She had reasons to be suspicious, and that's why she told Key to only trust Theo, because she knew Theo was not a part of their world, but also Theo is fundamentally a decent person. He's pure at heart. He is downtrodden. He's given up because his child died, and the world seems to be dying.
Yeah.
But he is still fundamentally a decent person, and she knows he can't be trusted.
So that night, after most people have gone to sleep, Theo is kind of laying awake in his room, and he hears a motorcycle arrive and eavesdrops on the people who have arrived.
In his socks, never put shoes on. I just want to point out, this is the point at which we realize when he steps out of the house into the mud and his socks get muddy. And at first, I remember the first time I saw this movie thinking, he is going to pay for that. He is never going to have shoes again, is he? And he doesn't.
Well, he does eventually, but only for a little while.
Eventually, yeah.
So he eavesdrops and learns that Luke orchestrated Julian's death and also intends to kill Theo later on and then use Key's baby as a political tool to start
political
the uprising.
reasons. Luke is a murderer. He is a fundamentalist murderer. I mean, you could call him a terrorist, an internal terrorist, but he is a murderer. When they are attacked on the roadside, the people that are driving past him, he tries to make it seem like he's trying to save everybody, but she gets killed, and he does not, because they are under orders to kill her. Because people he works with, but not under orders to kill Luke. And then he stops the car and gets his gun out and shoots the two police officers. At first you think he probably thinks that's the only way that they can get Key away. But he's just a murderer.
Even in that scene, neither Miriam nor Theo are on board with what he's doing. They all have papers at that point. They don't actually need to kill the cops. That's the whole reason Theo is there. He got transit papers for himself and Key. So they all have papers. It was unnecessary to kill the cops. Because of this, he goes up and wakes up Miriam and Key and tells them what's going on, and the three of them escape. It's kind of a wild scene. Basically, they sneak outside, and Theo disables the other two cars, and then they get in the car that they had arrived in, which unfortunately needs a jump start. Or they're trying to pop the clutch all the way down the hill. So here's the thing where the filmmaking comes in, because the filmmaker is trying to create tension, but anybody who has ever popped the clutch knows that is an ideal hill for popping a clutch on. And why doesn't he do it? Why isn't he able to do it until he's down at the bottom of the hill, where suddenly there is no hill, because you need a hill. You have to pick up speed. And so he literally has to get out of the car and push the car for Miriam to pop the clutch, when he could have done it on the hill down. It's an unbelievable scene for me. I've popped the clutch a lot of times, and he had ideal circumstances. That was quite a hill. But see, then it wouldn't have been as tense. They do manage to get away, and then they go to Jasper's house, which is somewhat hidden, and he gives them shelter and food, and also helps them come up with a new plan. So originally they were going to try to meet the ship tomorrow in one spot, but now they don't have enough time to get there, and the only other place where it's coming is offshore of Bexhill, which is a refugee detention center. And fortunately for them, Jasper sells weed to Sid, a guard at this refugee camp. So
who resells it. He's got his middleman.
I mean, I think Sid also uses it, but he also resells it inside the camp. So, not only is he a detention officer, but he's also aware of the camp. He knows people in the camp.
And there's something interesting about his weed too, because he does this twice. He does it with the
strawberry
Theo,
cough,
and again with Miriam. Yeah, the strawberry cough. So he cultivates it. He has hybridized this weed, and it basically is when you, on the exhale or after the exhale, you want to cough. And so you cough and you taste the strawberry flavor that's in the weed. And then when the first time he does it, I thought, well, that's just weird. But the second time he does it with Miriam, it occurs to me that there's a lot going on with this. It's creative. He needs to be creative. He needs to make things better than they are. So he's taken this product, this weed that makes people happy, and makes it just a little bit better. If you know it's coming. If you don't know to cough, then you won't flavor. But it's just, there are people in the movie, throughout the movie, that want things to be better, that believe things can be better. And I think that's one of the things that we see.
And Jasper is definitely one of those people, and we should probably come back and...
Oh, and we should tell them that Jasper is played by...
Michael Caine!
Michael Caine! He's a brilliant British actor, and I tell you what, if you never appreciated Michael Caine in anything else, you got to see this movie, because he is so different in this movie. Well, I mean, he's also good at Batman, but
I mean, he's good in
But
everything he's in.
he's good at everything he does, but this is a completely different, whacked out 60s kind of character.
Yeah, very rarely does he play hippies. It's also a little bit unclear how Jasper and Theo know each other. They've clearly known each other a long time. He knew Julian, he knew their child, so they've known each other for a very long time.
And there's an age gap.
That's the main reason it's curious, because they don't seem to be related, but there is an age gap. Jasper is significantly older than Theo. But then again, Jasper was a political cartoonist, and Theo and Julian were activists, so maybe they just like met in these kind of progressive circles.
Yeah, and on the other hand, they are playing an older couple here, Michael Caine and the woman who plays his wife. But Clive Owen is old enough to be Key's, the character. Theo is old enough to be Key's father. They had a child 20 years before, so presumably he is at least in his mid to late 40s. Yeah. Clive Owen doesn't look that old in this movie, so he looks like he's young. He's about the right age to be Jasper's son. Like there's that much of an age gap between them, but maybe it's only 15 years.
So Jasper arranges for them to meet with Sid and get them to Bexhill. Unfortunately, as they are sleeping, the fishes discover Jasper's house and a crazy sounding alarm goes off, allowing them just enough time to escape, but Jasper stays behind, explaining to Theo that he would only be a burden and that they need to be able to keep moving.
It's not that Jasper would be the burden, it's that his wife would, and he is never going to leave his wife.
I mean, kind of any extra person would have been a burden with what eventually ends up unfolding. But yeah, he's never going to leave his wife. He doesn't want to leave his dog either. Throughout the movie, there has been this recurring reference to something called quietus, which are basically suicide pills handed out by the government. So if the hopelessness ever gets too much, you can just take a suicide pill and it's over pretty quickly and supposedly painlessly and peacefully. And Jasper has actually been using these to kill the mice on his property. And in this scene, he uses it to kill his wife and dog so that they don't have to suffer from whatever the fishes are going to do. And then we do see from Theo's perspective that Theo, Key, and Miriam are hidden, but he comes back to see what's happening, and Jasper gets pretty brutally shot and killed by Luke.
He sacrifices himself for his friend. He sacrifices himself for Key. He sacrifices himself for the future.
And he also makes sure that his wife and dog don't suffer the same way.
Don't suffer.
Theo and Miriam and Key make it to this, what appears to be an old school, an abandoned school, because of course schools would be abandoned. There's no one left to learn.
It's a beautiful scene, maybe the most beautifully filmed scenes in the film, because it is an abandoned school, so the windows are broken and there's dirt and trash everywhere, and yet it's got all this children's artwork in it, and it is so beautiful. And they're walking through it silently, respectfully, because it's like a ghost town. Yeah. But it's because full of this children's art, and the music that's playing is kind of is infused with children's laughter.
Yes,
as they're walking through it.
And Theo gets startled by a deer that's apparently been living in the school.
There's a deer. There's life everywhere you look, including a deer in the school. Yeah.
And this is also where we get kind of our first-hand understanding of what happened to human fertility, because while Key is outside playing on the swings and relieving herself, Miriam and Theo have a talk where Miriam basically tells him about her experience, because she was a midwife. So she was one of the first people to realize what was going on. She says that it started with a number of miscarriages, an unusually high number of miscarriages. You know, miscarriages are always a part of the job, but there were kind of more than normal. And then she was making a follow-up appointment for someone, and she suddenly realized that 3 months out, she had no new appointments at all.
Yeah.
And she contacted other people that she knew in the same field, and they all said the same thing.
No pregnancies. Yeah.
Yeah, no new pregnancies. And she kind of ends her reminiscence by talking about the sound of children's voices and what it was like to live through a world where the sound of children's voices slowly faded away.
And you had just heard those voices in the ghost-like music in the building.
And they're literally sitting in an abandoned school, a school that is empty of children.
And this is the second time where I'm wondering if what happened to their child was related to what's happening. And we should also say, dear listeners, that we don't know what causes this. It's
Yeah.
almost it's a MacGuffin, I guess. It certainly never discussed what happened, what caused women's fertility to stop in the human species.
Because other species are fine. There's no indication that any other species has gone infertile. Yeah.
It's not environmental. We don't know what caused their child. Well, we do know he got the flu.
There was a flu pandemic in 2008.
But the flu is not usually something that kills people. And he was a healthy, I think, 3-year-old. Did they say he was healthy and a toddler, and it killed him. But so I'm wondering if that was the beginning. If maybe children were also being affected by whatever it is that caused the fertility crisis.
We don't know for sure, but it's possible. And it does sound like, at the very least, there was simultaneously a fertility crisis and a huge flu pandemic. After that scene, which is kind of our last like moment of quiet, really, before the end of the film, they meet up with Sid, who's kind of a weird guy, but he does take them, and he gets them onto a bus into Bexhill. Right before that, Key starts having contractions while she's in Sid's car, which they assume are just the
Braxton Hicks.
Yeah, Braxton Hicks, that's it. Yeah, but then they get on the bus and Key's water breaks. So she is going into labor. At that point, the bus is stopped at random and a guard enters the bus, presumably to pull people off to be executed. At which point, Miriam obstructs the guard. She stands up in front of Key and starts making a scene so that he'll take her instead. And he does take her. He then comes back for Key, but Theo is able to trick him into leaving her behind by claiming that she's covered in urine and feces, claiming that she's soiled herself, which, fortunately the water breaking kind of backs up that story, and the guard is grossed out and leaves.
That's a really interesting scene there too, when they're on the bus, and as the bus is pulled into the station there, or wherever it is that they are, you can see people in cages. Is a common visual theme throughout the movie.
Yes.
These are refugees who are called Fujis. And do you know, I was an hour into the movie before I realized that Fujis were refugees. But there are a lot of, I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
A lot of refugees have come from all over Europe because Britain was the last country in Europe to fall, basically. And by fall, we mean collapse. Societal structures collapsing. There are still quite a few societal structures existing in London, at least. So a lot of people have come to London, and these refugees are being caged and killed in some cases. And this bus stops at a place where there are people on the ground outside the bus on their knees, and some of them have hoods over their heads, and that's usually a sign that somebody's going to be executed. So when Miriam gets up and makes a scene and gets kicked off the bus and saves Key, she's once more another person who is sacrificing herself for Key and for the future.
And we don't see her get executed, but as the bus rolls away, you do see that bodies are on the ground. So people are being executed. All right, so then they make it into the camp, and they meet up with a Romani woman named Marika, who Sid had told them to meet up with. She has housing, and she's not sketchy. But there are other people around who are trying to get Key to come with them, but they're mostly men, and they feel very leering. It's a very, there's a lot of chaos and danger in this area, but fortunately, they are able to find Marika, and she seems much less sketchy than a lot of these other people. So she takes them to her place where she has a private room for them. It does look pretty dirty. It's basically a mattress on the floor. The floor is broken in places, and there are buckets of water for them to use because there's no running water.
Which is probably a real resource. I mean, they got a bed and 2 buckets of water, and that's what they probably paid for. So
it's still probably their best option. And then she leaves them alone, and Key pretty much immediately gives birth. There is almost no, she's already been in labor for some time and
walking. If you are in labor and you are walking, the baby is going to come a lot faster. In order to give the baby time to gradually get through the birth canal and massage its lungs, that's why they don't want women to walk a lot. As much she's been walking because it slows the birth down a little bit and gives the baby time. By the time she lays down and he gets the water to wash his hands, and then gets the bottle of alcohol out that he's been drinking from and pours that on his hands to sterilize his hands and also her legs and the place where she's laying on his coat. That baby's coming out, and this is an interesting scene to me. I even write down, I don't know how they managed to film this so seamlessly, because the camera comes around the actress and you immediately see the baby coming out from her body. That's the tricky part right there. And it's a baby. It's a real baby, and they never cut. He pulls the baby out. I watched it 3 times. There were no cuts from the moment the baby.
I don't think the baby's real. I think the baby is.
That could be how they do it. But it's 2006, so I'm not sure how much CGI they had. But anyway, from the moment the camera comes around her, he takes the baby out. He cleans it off a little bit, gives to her. There's a umbilical cord, and then he walks around her to go get water and to wash his hands, and then he comes back. That is all one scene, one cut. There's no cut there. So if they did CGI over that baby somehow, I guess they could. But it's a remarkably well done scene, is what I'm saying.
It is.
It looks like she's having a baby.
It does. It looks very realistic, and it is one long cut. I did look a little bit at how they filmed it, and they didn't. I didn't see anything about that specifically, but there are a couple of moments where they, quote unquote, cheat a long cut and basically use seamless cuts and a little bit of CGI editing to make it look like a longer cut. That's not the one that they mostly talk about. They mostly talk about the one at the end where we follow Theo for a really long time through a bunch of gunfighting and explosions.
Oh, yeah. Is that all one shot, too?
Yeah. A lot of that is all one shot, because this film has multiple long shots that are, like, one of them is like 3.5 minutes long, one of them is like 4.5 minutes long, and then one of them is over 6 minutes long.
So that's something that he's known for. Okay.
Yeah, and the 6-minute long one is the one where he's walking through the explosions. But yeah, so I know they use CGI to some extent to make the long cuts basically appear longer than they technically are. And that is one of those cuts. So I don't know for sure that they're using CGI on the baby, but I think it's like a doll with CGI to make it look more real.
It doesn't look like a real baby to me, that's for sure. But it looks close enough that I think they've done a really good job.
So she gives birth. They both pass out, and then in the morning, Sid arrives again, and Marika also arrives with him, and she appears to be trying to warn them about Sid. It's a little bit unclear, but she keeps pointing to Sid and saying bad.
Sid is not a great guy. Everything he does for money. He also talks about himself in the third person all the time.
Yeah.
Sid wants this. Sid does that. You can see from the gleam in his eye, pretty much from the first moment we meet him, that he's not a good guy. He is there to help them because they have money to pay him, or he's already been paid with weed. I'm not really sure. That's kind of unclear. Also, what happens to the 5,000 pounds?
Unclear.
There are a lot of things like that are unclear in the movie, and that's one of them, because if he'd had that 5,000 pounds on his person, he could have used it to get them out of a lot of situations. He could have bribed people. Could be that he never got paid.
Yeah, I don't know if he could have gotten out of the Sid situation, because it sounds like, so Sid basically reveals that there's a huge bounty on Theo and Key, and that he wants to get that money.
And see, that's the thing that takes us back again to the police, 2 officers getting killed. When Luke kills the 2 officers, he creates a whole world of trouble for everybody.
Yep.
Because they're living, everybody out, well, even inside London, but everybody outside London, even in the countryside, is living in a police state. Yep. And you killed 2 police officers
and was caught on camera doing it.
And was caught on camera. And I don't know how that happens. I was just going to say he was caught on camera, but I'm not sure how it happens.
I mean,
they're out in the countryside.
At the time, this was technically a sci-fi movie. It takes place in 2027. So wildly, we are now only 2 years out from when this movie is supposed to take place. But I do think that I think it's either the cop car had a camera on it, or there's just CCTV out in the country.
Yeah. So they got the license plate on the car, so they knew who the car belonged to.
Well, they got the license plate, but they also got images of their faces. There's like a broadcast at one point right after the confrontation with the police where they say that it's only a matter of time before they're able to clean up the images of their faces and show them. That
is what causes a lot of the problems later on, and it's why Sid turns against them. Yeah. He was getting paid, or he had been paid by Jasper, but there's a big bounty, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And then he notices versus the baby, which is an even bigger bounty, potential bounty. So, yeah.
But this is where Marika proves herself to be the fucking hero of the movie, because she like comes up behind him and smashes him over the head with some kind of stick or something, and they are able to get away, largely because of her completely spontaneous selflessness.
And I would just throw in here that other than Theo, pretty much every person in this film who is a hero is a woman.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, Jasper is too, but everybody else, all the other men are just horrible. Just horrible.
Yeah, there's definitely a gender element at work here that I want to talk about. Oh, also, we find out that the baby is a girl.
And of course it's a girl.
Key has been assuming this whole time that it would be a boy, but it is a girl. So they do manage to get away from Sid, and as Sid is like chasing after them, Theo comes back and like hits him pretty hard in the head. It is kind of implied that Theo kills him at that point, and Sid is then not a problem anymore. And then we get one final very brief moment of respite again, where Marika brings them to her friends or possibly her family, and this is why you think she's probably Russian, because these people are definitely Russian, the people that she brings them to. And at this point, Theo finally gets real shoes again. I did kind of skip past this, but he has been wearing flip-flops this whole time, because Jasper did give him shoes, but
which was foreshadowed when he steps into the mud, when he steps out of the house to listen in on the conversations, and instead of going upstairs and getting his shoes on first and then waking everybody up, he wakes everybody up and they go out. And it just makes no sense. It's a big flaw in the movie for me, but yeah.
I think it's intentional. I think it's meant to show how kind of vulnerable he is, and also it reminds me of Die Hard, because Bruce Willis does not have shoes for most of Die Hard. It's like a famous part of that movie.
I knew there was something it reminded me of, but I couldn't remember what it was. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like at this point this is like a trope of the everyman hero, is at some point he's got to go without shoes. But they do find him some shoes that actually fit, and he gets to wear shoes for the rest of the movie. Oh, and there is a very sweet moment where Key is kind of sharing her baby with this much older Russian woman, and they're kind of oohing and eyeing over the baby, and it's very sweet and very brief. And then we're right back out into the chaos, and the chaos is even worse this time. They nearly make it to the rowboat, and then Luke shows up with his fishes because he's blown a hole in the fence and come through, and they immediately shoot the guy in the head who had given Clive Owen his shoes. They don't shoot Marika, but Luke makes a show of telling them not to kill Theo so that he can then get Key away from Theo, and then basically comes back and says, once we're out of earshot, kill them all.
And Theo hears it.
But we assume that Key doesn't. We assume that the point was so that Luke can pretend to Key that he didn't have any of these people killed. And then the army shows up. A giant tank rolls in, and more violence ensues, but it does allow Theo and Marika to get away, and we kind of lose track of Marika for a little bit, but Theo goes after the direction that the fishes have gone in with Key and has to duck through. At this point, there's just a full-on war zone happening.
It's horrible. It's just horrible. People are getting killed left and right.
Yeah, it's incredibly chaotic, incredibly violent.
The long 6-minute scene that you talked about earlier. So it is one of those scenes where you have to completely suspend disbelief, because he crisscrosses back and forth in the middle of this war zone where people are getting shot and killed left and right, and he manages to avoid getting killed at every turn. And even the guy with the dreadlocks, whose name I can't remember, but he's a real asshole and a famous actor.
Patrick, I think.
He finally gets killed. He has come after Theo over and over again, just wanting to kill Theo. He doesn't really care about anything else. Just for some reason has it in for Theo.
There is a reason. So he's played by Charlie Hunnam, who, you're right, is like a pretty well-known actor. And there is a reason. It's because, and it's honestly like a pretty hypocritical reason, but there is a reason. It's because when they attacked and killed Julian, they were gonna shoot Theo as well. They rode past, shot Julian, and then were riding up and trying to fire at Theo, and he opened his car door and hit their motorcycle, and whoever was on that motorcycle did apparently die from his injuries.
I thought Miriam did that. I thought it was done from the back seat.
Theo was in the back seat. Julian's the one who was in the front.
You're right. Julian and Luke were in the front seat. Okay.
So that's why he's pissed.
He killed his friend. Okay.
His cousin, I think.
After that, he is on a war path to kill Theo. Theo over and over and over again. And he finally gets killed himself in a scene that is so chaotic. You could watch it 5 times and not see everything that happens in it. But basically, Theo is crisscrossing back and forth between gunfire and cannon fire and just explosions everywhere. I mean, this was a prison. Not a prison so much, but like a camp for prisoners.
It's a kind of concentration camp.
That's what I'm looking for. It's a concentration camp. So, and in the end, the government comes in and destroys it. You can see the scene. One of the very last scenes in the movie. They bomb the place.
They blow the whole place.
Everybody was there. Yeah. The Mishka and Marika and the Russian grandma. They're probably both killed. Everybody's going to be killed. But at this point, he is somehow avoiding the gunfire, gets into the building. And this, to me, is the most fascinating and awesome scene in the whole movie, actually. He's a man on a mission. And I think that's what Cuarón is trying to show here, that he was so driven to save Key, to save her baby, to save the future, because he knows what's at stake here. These other assholes don't have a clue.
Well, or they don't
what's
care.
At stake. They don't care. Yeah, they were going to use the baby for political reasons, but he now understands that this is the future. If she can have a baby, other women can have babies, because there's kind of an implication that once the baby stopped coming, women grew, what is that called? Collective, where women, kind of a collective trauma, where they because of this ongoing drought of babies, it kept the wheel going.
Well, it's not just women. The implication is that everyone basically immediately lost hope and went insane, and that all of this violence is a result of this lack of hope for the future.
Because without babies, without the future, you have no hope. There's so much symbolism in this movie. There's no hope. Humans are creatures who need to believe in a future. What's the point if you don't? So we're kind of jumping into the main themes here. The movie's about hope. It's about the future, and it all coalesces in this last scene where he manages to overcome this incredible war scene. It's a miracle. There's no other word for it. And I'm not saying this movie is about God. There are a lot of religious symbolism in it. There's a lot of but it's not about God. It's not about
God.
It's just they use the symbolism because Christian symbolism, and probably many other religions as well, all work around concepts of forgiveness and redemption. Easter is all about redemption and rebirth, and this is a movie literally about rebirth of the human species, because he is the hope for rebirth of mankind, of humanity, I should say.
Religion is very important thematically, because first of all, we keep seeing in the background,
and it is very.
Theo and Jasper talk about there are like these two different groups, the repenters and the flagellants or something.
Yeah, there's another one too that I wrote down, but I can't remember what it was.
Well, those are two. There might be a third one, but there's one group that's the repenters. Maybe that's it. There's the repenters who sit around just asking God for forgiveness, and then Theo makes a joke about having briefly dated a woman who then joined the flagellants, who flog themselves.
Is that what it was? I thought he said the recanters, and maybe I thought, what the hell is that? I don't know.
I'm not sure, but he does reference that they whip themselves. I'm not sure. I might be wrong about what they're called.
So what you're saying makes a lot more sense. Yeah. So there's a lot of religious imagery and themes in this movie. He brings, I don't know what Cuarón's background is, but I'm assuming he's big on specifically Christian theology and imagery in this movie.
Although Jasper and Miriam, they keep saying Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Yeah,
which is
we'll get
not
to that.
A Christian thing.
No, that's Hindu. Isn't it Hindu?
That's it, yeah.
Shanti means hope. Oh, no, peace. It means peace. Shanti means peace, because I looked it up. So when he gets into the movie, he survives all the gunfire. He gets into the building. There's a bomb that goes off right before he goes in.
And it collapses the stairs.
So he's running up these stairs, and at first you're not even sure that the stairs are going to go as far as he needs them to go. And there are bodies draped everywhere. And there's a guy sticking out of the floor, and you can see he's been cut in half. I mean, it's horrible. It's a horrific scene, and he gets to the top, and then he finds Luke. So Luke is in a corner, shooting at the window and talking to him, and then shooting at the window and talking to him, and every time he talks to him, Theo jumps back thinking he's going to shoot him, but he doesn't. So there's this dialogue that goes on, and eventually, I think Luke is still alive when he leaves him, but he leaves him and finds Key.
He finds Key with Luke. They're not in literally the same
so he
alcove.
takes Key at that point, and the baby.
But he takes her, and Luke does fire at him.
He does fire at him. But Luke has gone crazy at this point. He is absolutely insane at this point. And Theo can see that.
He's talking about the baby, but he's kind of being nonsensical. When Theo finds them, I agree, like, Luke has gone kind of crazy, but it's almost as if the concept of hope has driven him crazy, because
and actually he's making his case.
But he's also, he's talking about the baby and seeing the baby and the baby looking at him, and he's kind of babbling and he doesn't make a ton of sense. It's like he's torn between the hope that the baby represents and his desperate desire to stick to his political plan, but he also keeps referring to the baby as a boy until Theo says, it's a girl, Luke.
What he's saying about the baby is crazy because he doesn't really understand. Also, he's trying to make excuses for himself. He's trying to explain to Theo why he's done what he's done, because he thinks what he's done is heroic, and it's not. He is the destroyer. He's not the giver of life. He has killed so many people who were in the process of trying to preserve life, and he can't even see it. And he's still at that moment, and you may be right, that he's torn between seeing the child as hope and clinging to his belief that he's saving the world. While the craziness with Luke is happening, Theo is standing there with Key, is that right?
She's there. She's kind of hidden by some rubble, basically.
So he's keeping her safe while he's trying to get away from Luke, and every time they start to move away from him, he turns back to them with the gun. So it's a scene that gets kind of draws out 2 or 3 times, but they eventually do get away from him. Then they start to leave, and the army is coming in. You know, at first point you're thinking, oh no, we've just gotten finished with the rebels, and now we've got the army, and yet as soon as they leave, the baby is crying nonstop. And at this point, I'm also sitting there thinking, she has not fed that baby yet. We have not seen her feed the baby once. And the baby's at least 24 hours old at this point, has not been fed, screaming at the top of her lungs. And she can't get her to quiet, which is, you know, a scene that reminds me of one of the most horrific scenes in the TV show MASH. You've probably never seen MASH, but there's an episode where Alan Alda's character is trying to save a bunch of people, you know, from the Korean army, and they have to be quiet because they're in a war zone, and this baby keeps crying, and the woman has to smother the baby to save the village. Terrific.
Okay.
And, you know, and later on I saw this as an adult thinking, why doesn't she just breastfeed the baby? You know, why does she have to kill her? But anyway, so that's what I was afraid was going to happen when I first saw this movie. I'm thinking, oh, she's going to have to kill this baby, you know, so they can get out. Anyway, so the baby is crying, and she doesn't have to kill him because it's a sound. Once again, one of our themes is the sound of children's laughter, the sound of baby's tears. It's really important here because she's crying. The baby is crying, and that is what saves them, because they walk out in just one of the best scenes I think that's ever been filmed in a movie. They walk out with all these soldiers backing up, stopping in their tracks. Some of them cross themselves, you know, the Catholic cross. It's a holy scene. Yeah. They treat this woman and her child as Mary and Christ. That's what they're seeing here. It's very holy. It's quiet. The gunfire has stopped, and they walk out, and it's like they are worshiping at this woman's feet as Theo walks her out through them. And it goes on for several minutes. I don't know how long, but it does seem like it's one take.
I don't think it is one take because they actually keep cutting between Theo and Key and the people responding.
Yeah, you're right. So all these different, you're right. It's just a total reverence. They get through, and then all of a sudden somebody fires a gun somewhere else, and the war resumes.
I think it's a bomb, actually. I think
it might be a bomb. Yeah.
I'm not 100%.
Those few moments. Yeah. Because you can just see everything on their faces. They all, first of all, they feel hope for the first time probably in a very long time. And these are soldiers. They're hardened soldiers. But the sound of a baby's cries.
They're also people who have maybe never seen a baby.
Maybe never seen a baby, never heard a baby cry except in movies. And they know what it means. They instantly know what it means, that it is hope for the future. If this woman can have a baby, maybe other women can have babies. If humans can be born again, and I don't mean in a Christian sense, but if we can start having babies again, then maybe this endless war can end.
Yeah, and it basically lasts just long enough for Theo and Key to get past the war zone, and then it all resumes. Then they meet up with Marika again, who takes them to the boat, and for some reason refuses to get on the boat with them.
Her life is there, her family is there, and she doesn't know that the planes are coming to destroy the town. So
true, but I feel like it almost has a feeling of she doesn't feel like she deserves to be with them or something. Like, this vote is for you. You know, it has this sort of like reverence to it. And she pushes them off, and they go out to sea, and they meet the buoy, which is where the ship called Tomorrow is supposed to come. And as they are waiting there, that's when the airstrike happens, and we see all of Bexhill blow up in the background. And then Theo teaches Key how to burp the baby, and Key notices a bunch of blood in the bottom of the boat and starts freaking out that she's bleeding. But Theo reveals that it's actually him. It's honestly not clear when he got shot, but he got shot at some point, possibly by Luke. You did?
Yeah, when I saw it yesterday, it's the third time I've seen the movie, I finally saw him get shot. And it's when they start to run away from Luke. I'm not sure if it might be Luke that shoots him, but he gets one final shot off, and you can see Theo stumble just a little bit, like he's been hit.
Yeah.
But that's the first time I've ever noticed it, because I wondered when he got shot.
I've always figured it was Luke, but it's really hard to tell when it happens. So he's bleeding out in the boat, and Key tells him that she's going to name her baby Dylan, which was Theo's child's name.
But it's her third choice. At first, it was going to be
her first choice was Froley.
And where did that come from?
No idea. But apparently, that's a boy's name and not a girl's name.
And not a girl's name.
When she found out it was a girl, she changed it to Bazooka.
But then to honor Theo and his sacrifice and Julian's sacrifice.
Yeah. And then he loses consciousness right as the ship appears.
And the implication is he's died, but we don't know because it is a film about hope. And I choose to believe that he does not die and that the ship saves them both. That's what I choose to believe. But here's what I wrote about the last scene. That the final sounds in this movie that you hear as the boat is getting close to them and you see the word tomorrow, that's the name of the boat, the sounds that the filmmaker is giving us to hear, or children's laughter on a playground, followed by John Lennon.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about the scene where Theo and Miriam discuss, her experience and the sound of children. I mean, we did talk about it already, but like part of the reason that I wanted to point out that scene where Miriam talks about being in a world where children's laughter, or the sound of children's voices slowly faded out, is because that's part of what we're calling back to in the end there, is that we don't see it, but the implication is that the sound of children's voices is returning.
So before we get into hot takes, and I've actually gone over everything that I was in my hot takes that we've talked about, I just like to talk a little bit about some of the visuals. Everything about the landscape in this movie is foul. Even the countryside is foul. There's smoke coming out of smokestacks in factories, presumably, even in the country, everywhere. Fires are burning everywhere. They're burning the dead cows in the field. It's bleak, it's overcast, you never see the sun come out. Well, there are occasional glimpses of sunlight, but for the most part, it's really bleak and overcast. It's industrial wasteland as they leave Jasper's place. And the schools are dead places. The school we see is overgrown. The kids' artwork is faded, but it's still there, so that's nice. But it still has life because the deer prances through. Just everything. There's so many visual things here that I really like, but it's a world full of despair. A world without children's voices. You never hear a child's voice in this movie. On the cages. There are cages full of people everywhere, and he sees them in the beginning of the movie. He sees them when he's on the bus, and the bus is ensconced in a mesh, but it's not mesh, but it's protective caging,
like a cage.
I guess.
Yeah.
The bus itself is kind of a cage, but it's to protect them.
Yeah.
Because as they go through, or maybe it's a train, I don't remember, but people throw things at the bus, and so it protects them. But he's driving past people in cages, and then when they get to the camp at the end, they're coming into a camp where people are in cages, and you think for a minute, oh no, they're going to be in a cage, but they never do end up in a cage, which is good. There are loose dogs everywhere, and yet there are signs of civilization. So the Russian woman we were talking about, who has the photo of Lenin, she lives in a building that has bank on the front. It's a corner, and it's like one of those. It's kind of right out of Harry Potter. Those kind of corner buildings that they have in London, and that's what it reminded me of, Harry Potter. But it's also just very London-like. It's in the middle of this concentration camp, but it's a bank building basically, and that's where she has taken up residence. And the contrast of all of that with Nigel's house, which is in a park setting, and it's filled with art, but even on the the way there. They have to go past all these smokestacks, and it's muddy, and there's trash everywhere, and there's soldiers with guns and loose dogs and people on their knees waiting to be killed. These are scenes that repeat periodically in the film.
Even Nigel's actual apartment, it's very colorless and void.
Yeah,
like
it's drab.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is clean, but it's like all white and gray.
Gray.
So like it feels
industrial.
It feels like
it's industrial.
Yeah, it feels like the only color that we see is when Theo is passing the park and you briefly see a bit of greenery.
And the other thing about the artwork in the school building, didn't it remind you of cave dwelling paintings? And then that's what it reminded me of. And then later on, when they get into the little rowboat, they are passing through an aqueduct or something.
Yeah.
And it has actual cave paintings on it that are obviously have been made in the last 20 years by people who are living in this concentration camp, not people who lived 5,000 years ago. But that's kind of what both of those scenes remind me of. So I think Cuarón's sense of visual storytelling is really interesting and smart. I really like it.
And that kind of creates this sense of like humanity is at its end, but it's also back at the beginning. You know?
That's exactly what it does. The cave-dwelling paintings and the school. Yeah, it's exactly what it was.
And I did want to mention that Cuarón apparently very specifically, I guess we haven't really talked about race that much during this discussion, but Key is a young black woman. And Cuarón apparently specifically wanted her to be a young black woman because human life started in Africa, and he wanted to kind of harken back to that. And he also wanted it to be very clear that it was a refugee who was essentially going to be responsible for restarting the human race. That it would be the people who were the most dispossessed.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, the contrast in themes. In some places, and maybe at least twice, Theo says something about, even if they discover the cure for infertility, it's too late, the world has gone to shit. So it's the end of the world as they know it, but it's also the beginning. It's an end and a beginning, kind of like Easter morning is. Good Friday. You can't have Easter morning without Good Friday. Christ has to die before he can be reborn, and that's the Christian themes that I'm picking up in the movie. There's a lot of that, a lot of rebirth and all that. But I love this film. The very MacGuffin of it is the infertility thing. It's fascinating. It reveals how important women are. I mean, the baby isn't a boy, it's a girl. Even if she gives birth to a boy, boys can't have babies. So, but if it's a girl, the hope is that girl can have babies.
I don't want to speak too much in absolutes. I think that all genders are equally capable of violence, but in the film, it definitely feels like violence is a little bit gendered. It's mostly the men who do the violence, and that's very apparent in the differences between Luke and Julian. When Julian is running the fishes, they're not as violent. There's a scene about, or there's a line about how they used to blow things up, but she realized that was causing more destruction than good, and so she stopped it. But Luke has her killed so that he can take the group in a more violent direction. And then he basically dies in a hail of gunfire. And in the middle of him going crazy over the baby, he keeps referring to the baby as a boy. And it's when Theo says the baby is a girl that he kind of stops in his tracks for a moment. It's like the baby as a girl cannot continue this legacy of violence for him.
And there are two other things about the gender thing. When the youngest person dies, Diego, when Theo goes into his office, he's walking through the office, all of the women are crying over this. The men are not crying. So that's one thing. Women understand why this is important, and they are free enough in their emotions that they can cry in public over the loss of this person's life. So that's one thing. But the other thing is Julian is a fascinating character. She's not on screen for very much. I mean, I bet it's a total of 10 or 15 minutes. And of course, it's Julianne Moore, who's brilliant. But she's a natural leader, which is how she was able to take over the group and make them less violent. She is good with people. She's charismatic. She has funneled her sorrow over the loss of their child into this determination to make the world a better place. And she couldn't have a baby, but she could do this. And we don't know what happened in their relationship, but clearly they still love each other. They've just chosen to not live together because they both had different reactions. Now we don't know what Theo's reaction was exactly. He kind of feels that she didn't feel anything because she did this.
And she does say that it was hard for her to look at him because he had, like, their child
The
had
baby's
his
eyes.
eyes. So
Yeah.
it almost seems like it was just for her being around him made her grief too present.
Yeah.
After Luke takes over the group, because the point of the fishes is to fight for the rights of refugees. And then Luke takes over and ends the movie by violently breaking into the refugee camp and starting a firefight that ends in the complete destruction of the whole camp. He completely perverted the group.
Thousands of people, probably.
Thousands of completely innocent people who had no idea what was going on. He's so set on his own ego, basically, on his own political agenda, that he gets all of these people killed when he's supposed to be a part of a group that's fighting for their rights.
One of my favorite lines in the movie is when they ask, I think it's Theo who asks Key how the baby is, and she says, "How is she? Annoyed."
Yeah, honestly, Key is such a bright spot. Apart from being, the literal embodiment of hope, she and Jasper are like the only characters who have a sense of humor in the whole movie.
Have a sense of humor. The others are all too serious.
Okay, I want to talk about Jasper just a little bit because the early conversation between him and Theo before the plot really takes off really kind of demonstrates to you who both of these people are. They're both good people who were previously, their previous careers were dedicated to trying to make the world better. But Jasper's specifically, he was a political cartoonist, so he was trying to make the world better, but his job was kind of inherently a bit more lighthearted, whereas Theo was an activist, and so, his job was more direct. And once he lost his child, it kind of seems like he lost all hope for the world. Like whether or not his child's loss was directly related to the infertility crisis, they coincided, and for him they might as well be the same thing. His loss of his child was his loss of hope. Humanity's loss of children in general was humanity's loss of hope.
Yes.
But Jasper kind of stands in contrast to him, not necessarily because he has something that Theo doesn't, but more that he has just decided to be happy anyway. He's decided to live in his own little compound. He's decided to keep taking care of his wife. Because he no longer has a specific goal that he can go after, he's decided to just live as contently as possible. So he's growing weed and he's selling it to people. He's trying to spread happiness in this small way that weed essentially can provide. And the change for him is when similar to Theo, when he sees Key and that she's pregnant, all of a sudden it's like that his decision is to give up that happiness in order to help her.
And help humanity.
Yeah.
He sees her as the hope for humanity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's more important than his little world.
Exactly. Well, also, I should mention, he keeps playing Goodbye Ruby Tuesday, which I believe is a Rolling Stones song.
But they're not singing it. It's their song, but it's being performed by Junior Parker, who is a, I think he's a jazz blues guy. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But he's singing it. It's not their version of it. So.
It's not their version, yeah.
I think that's right. Oh, no. He's performing Tomorrow Never Knows. Ruby Tuesday performed by Franco Battiato. I don't know who that is. But Court of the Crimson King is another 60s song by King Crimson, and that's played when he's riding in the big fancy car.
Yeah, and when he goes up to his wealthy cousin. It feels very appropriate because it's called The Court of the Crimson King, and that's like the lyrics that you're hearing. It's while he's essentially entering the nice part of the world, the quote-unquote nice part.
The last song is John Lennon, Bring on the Lucy, Free the People, the recurring line in it, or whatever is free the people, but it's
Free
Frida.
the people now. Yeah.
Free the people, but it's Frida, Freda, people, Peeple, so it's a play on words, and that's what he's singing at the end, and it is Lennon. It is his recording of it.
Those were the main things that I wanted to talk about. I don't know that this really counts as a hot take, but I guess I will say that my, lukewarm hot take / point of further discussion for people who are interested is that I think Children of Men is very similar to The Last of Us, which is both a video game and now an HBO TV show. They are both about a man who has a certain set of skills and who has lost a child and has largely lost his sense of hope and his ability to connect with other people, who is then reunited with a young woman that he must protect and help travel across the wasteland to get her where she needs to be. So that's basically the plot of both of these stories. There are obviously some very significant differences. The Last of Us is a zombie story, and also they kind of have opposite arcs. I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but I would say that Children of Men starts in a very hopeless place and ends in a very hopeful place, and I think The Last of Us kind of does the opposite. Not entirely. I don't want to say that The Last of Us ends in an entirely hopeless place, but The Last of Us is a lot more about the main character's trauma and how it has warped his ability to respond to things.
Which could have happened to Theo, but it doesn't. And that's why I think he's a great character.
And it actually brings up one of the points that I want to make, because you might not notice it, but Theo never picks up a gun for the whole movie. He does kill people, but entirely in self-defense. Like, he accidentally kills the motorist, but he does it with a car door, and because that person is actively trying to kill them. And it is implied that he probably kills Sid, but he does it with a bludgeoning implement that's just there, and again, Sid is actively trying to kill them.
And steal the baby.
Yeah.
Kill him and steal the baby, yeah.
So yeah, at no point does Theo pick up a gun, and he does engage in violence, but only as an absolute last resort to protect himself and to protect Key. So I think that's intentional. I think it's intentional, and it's important that that essentially Theo is not really an action star. He is an actual, like, everyday man kind of character, and most of what he does is just help Key get from place to place. He understands how the world works, and he knows just enough people and just enough things to help her keep moving. But the main thing that he does is not fight. It's essentially flee.
I would also add that he transforms during the movie. At the beginning of the story, he is a guy who lives alone. He drinks heavily. He smokes. He's picked up smoking. He goes to a job he doesn't really love. He doesn't have any friends. And he goes to the dog race.
The dog races.
The dog racetrack. The dog racetrack.
Yeah.
He does that. He places bets on it. He's got a very kind of simple existence. And by simple, I mean he's gone in the opposite direction of what an activist. He's become passive. He's very passive. And he transforms during the course of the movie, becomes just the opposite. He reacquires his humanity, his sense of purpose, and maybe sacrifices himself at the end. It's nebulous. We don't know. But he certainly sacrifices the life he had. And a lot of his Jasper. He sacrificed his friendship.
Yeah, he loses Jasper.
One true friend. So his life as he knew it is gone. And we don't know, even if he's alive, we don't know where they're headed. What this Free the People place, whatever it is.
The Human Project.
The Human Project. Free the People. We don't know what that is. We don't have any idea what that is. It's a MacGuffin. There's no description. It's a colony, we think. They have a ship. That's all we know.
Yeah. We mentioned earlier that we know that the infertility problem is only a human problem. We do know that because the cows are still reproducing, the dogs are still reproducing, and specifically the cats are still reproducing. In the scene right after Theo finds out that Key is pregnant, when they're all discussing what to do next, there are 2 kittens that keep trying to climb up his pant leg, and it keeps cutting to him looking down at them. And it kind of feels like in that moment, it's like he's marveling at them as babies. You know, they are babies, and he can't not think about the babies. So
there's a lot going on in that scene, because he also is looking back at Key in between. And I wrote in my notes, Key trusts him and the kittens trust him. He is a trustworthy guy. Julian trusted him.
I think that's it. I think that's all I got.
Well, that, dear listeners, is all for today. This has been Woman Inherits the Earth, a discussion podcast about women and movies from the perspective of a mother and daughter.
I'm Tessa Dare. You can find me at my website, tessadare.com. That's TESSADAIR.com, where you can sign up for my email list, or you can follow me on Instagram and Threads at author.tess.adair. Or you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/womaninheritstheearth.
And I am Beth Von Barron. You can follow me on Instagram at STL_writer_Beth. on Blue Sky, where I have just joined at STL Writer Beth, all run together, .bsky.social, or sign up for my weekly Substack email, Saturday Morning Musings, at stlwriterbeth.substack.com. Thank you for listening. Please join us again in about 2 weeks.